إذا كربات جدلين وعلى قال فني كبر بيت كتكوان تنيقول بقاري دامو كيسكو بكرة ومتربدا لمعلم وركيزي ويزدمدمو مع العلامة تايتقمو يخلقوا تسعلت السفاجو كيحان سلام قاشاي كونن كيكوا عادب على مدى قلبو والعصوكي وتيرن كسكو بي أنمو كساب جنت المحصر كيكوا عادب تسفاكي سيبكي بعزو سورات بيبع العلامات عين اللوت البات يغير ومسفي ترك نسي يدي شوخ كوحي كنت العسي ساقت عيبني متر برياتي اي عالم تروك يبمتي عرفت حسين غاصب علي سلمت وعلي قارف عيني كسبوا بيبوسي تمثلوا نفسي تباسي يا بآخر برسي كيسكوا حالي تسخاني سيكي قلت ورات بيبع العلامات عين اللوت الواد عزوتي وتي وقالوا السمع بلين هاوز بلسك فيه دنا كربات قدلين ولا قول فني كبر بيت كتكوان تنيقول بقاري دامو كيسكو بكرة ومتربدا لمعلم ورقيزي ويزدمدمو مع العلامة تايتقمو يخلقوا تسعانت السفاجو كيحان سلام قاشاي كونن كيكوا عادب على مدى قلبو والعصوكي وتيرن كسكو بي أنمو كساب جرم المحصر كيكوا عادب تسفاكي سيمكي كل سورات بيبع العلامات عين اللوت البات ما حولي كتحين سحيتان يشلب بورمس حلحلتان اي خلالهم عقلي مفتح مسف ودبتلك على مدن تانيتيا كسكم يبو تسفانتي فيه رفتو سلامتاني كنتي لحلفه مبعت حلنا دقبر اي تدفع كنت انا ابوك حيتك كيكو عادي تسفاني سيمكي بعزو صورات بيبع العلامات عين اللوت البات عايب لني على شمن قدي زلبتي بحالته عانب لني يري على المحسد قامته كيكوا عادي حانتي جراني شبت الماسيا وحدة أمبرن تلقى على المدى قامته تكوت فعال قاس اللو زيني رسايلان دقلات واضح زامنري كوشي كون سهلا انت لا تكون يبلي كوكي حيو كوكي حزام غيرين على منهو معادو الرأيني ترى مسهو معادو الرأيني ترى مسهو وي وي أمين علاتو حساب الدري كوحي كورتها انت الاتك عند يبلي يقوى عادي حالك جران شيء ماتيا واحدة أمرا تلقى على المدى كامتها كواكر حيو كتوك حدا مكرين أنا مرهو معانو يرأيني جران سرهو معانو رأيني اللو جران سرهو وي وي أهي
Welcome everyone to the Health Professionals Network for Tigray's first ever mental and wellness retreat. When we think of mental health, especially in our community, not only is it not out on our radar, it's considered taboo. However, we are forced to confront it. The world has seen what it means to be confined, to grieve, to lose time, as we have gone through nearly 2 years of a pandemic. This is why we at HPN4Tigray want to put a spotlight on the importance of mental well-being, especially as we face the war on Tigray. As we speak, our people are experiencing mental and physical anguish caused by this war on Tigray. And this has been echoed in the diaspora in varying degrees. HPN4Tigray is fully committed to addressing and supporting our communities in Tigray, Sudan, and the diaspora. We believe mental health care is a basic human right. At HPN4Tigray, we strive to support mental health awareness education with the aim of creating safe spaces. HPN4Tigray, along with other organizations, have formed a think tank consisting of 15 support group leaders throughout North America who are working to address wellness and mental health across all age groups in our communities. We are super excited to bring you day one of this 2-day wellness retreat. I want to thank our sponsors as seen on the screen and those that have tirelessly worked to put this event together. To the people of Tigray, Ajohum, Ajona, Tsabah Khwagahiyu. It is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Yodit Mesfin. She is an activist, organizer, CEO of a nonprofit, Enterprise at Work, founder of Black Men Read, and a board advisor to HPN4Tigray. Yodit has generously donated our Black Stories book box towards HPN4Tigray's art and merchandise auction. You'll learn more about this exciting auction later in the program. Again, I want to thank our sponsors. We have about nearly 9 sponsors. We are forever grateful for this event, for your sponsorship as well. And I want to thank you all for joining and prioritizing mental health and finding ways to heal oneself and Tigray. Thank you.
Thank you, Salah. It's good to be with you today, everyone. As you said, Salah, the last year has been one filled with deep loss and deep revelation for me. I'm bringing the experience of being raised primarily as a Black-bodied woman in the US, a nation whose history is built upon the labor, violence, and terror of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, coupled with the lineage and deep connection that I share with my Tigrayan and Ethiopian family. In the last 200 days, I have understood more deeply the work of my father, Mesfin Ayano, my grandmother, Mitzlal Gebre Hewitt. I have understood their fight for the liberation of Ethiopian people more deeply. And I have come to understand the experience that my brother, Barhane Mereskel, and my cousins, many of whom are on today, experience as survivors of refugee camps, of exodus out of Ethiopia for their survival and their time in the Sudan before making it here to the US. I have understood this legacy of joy and pain that is ingrained in my DNA. And I bring that, both that joy and that pain, into this space today. It doesn't fall lightly on me that between the pandemic and the war on Tigray, we've lost so many loved ones, family, friends, and freedom fighters. And I would like, before we begin, to invite us to take a moment to honor those lives, to speak the names of our ancestors, new and old, the angels that we now know by name. And so if you are able to come off of mute, I want you to practice or to participate with me in naming those who we are lifting up today as we gather in this space for collective healing. I'll speak the name of my mother, Cassandra Johnson. I'll speak the name of my friend, Marlo Stoudemire, who I lost last year to COVID. I'll speak the name of my cousin, Kasai Mesfin, who lost 10 family members in Tigray. Please join me as well in speaking the names of our ancestors and elders, and we'll take just about 20 seconds for that.
Taba Binega.
Mama Rosie.
Yeshiwandam Gebra Ziabher, and the mother of Wahid Abraha.
Yes, yes.
Agasta Sabhat.
Say their names, yes.
Zenawi, he died only a few days ago, my cousin.
Asgala Tasfai, my classmate, was killed by the Eritrean troops.
And if you are unable to speak their name aloud, know that we are holding you in light and love as we process our individual, familial, and collective grief. And before I move on to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Tedros, I'd like to just share a brief poem written in June of 2020 in honor of the UN's International Day of Support for Victims of Torture in Ethiopia. And this poem is called, sorry, one second here, there are a few. Just Learn from Him by Gesh Fashale. He steps into migration while he was still a child. He started his journey leaving his family, and he started his journey at the very night without knowing where his destinations be. He steps ahead without knowing his direction. And while he still doesn't have a friend to accompany, and thus becomes stressed and alone from time to time, he is too young to balance on his thoughts. He experiences torture and rape and becomes helpless, starting to worry and cry alone. Lost, his cognition is a result of psychological distress and lack of sleep. He's less calm and despairs about the taste of life, what to report, for he's been through so much challenges and difficulties. After many ups and downs, though, to get hope and taste of life, he begins to balance his thoughts, to become settled in what he has learned, to consider all that he has come through. And he says, thank you loudly. For he has learned how to untie the tied rope, to feed the hungry belly, to satisfy the thirsty throat, and to begin to heal the tortured life. Yes, of course, know what you do not know, ask what you do not understand, speak and share to your friends, spread it and tell to everyone. Let there be healing. And with that, I am delighted to introduce our first speaker of the day, Dr. Tedros, who will share wisdom with us. If we can advance to the next slide. This is our agenda, you all, for the day. If you want to go back real quick, we'll hear from Dr. Tedros and then Dr. Ayoda Gidai. We'll have an intermission and hear from 3 more speakers who will bring to you before rounding out with a practice of releasing trauma and more introductions to our support groups. And now I'd love to share a little bit about Dr. Tedros. Next slide, please. He is a physician and specialist in general medicine practicing in Sweden for the past 32 years. I understand you're there now and it's almost 8 p.m., Dr. Tedros, almost bedtime. He is author of a published book written in Tigrinya about depression and anxiety. And we're so grateful that you also donated 50 books to Health Professionals Network for Tigray, which will be used in our fundraiser and to resource Tegaru community centers and leaders. I'm so glad you're here, Dr. Tedros.
Yeah. Thank you very much, HPN4Tigray. I've been asked to speak in Tigrinya. ስለዚህ በትግርኛ ክዛረብ ቀሲለ ዝዛረብ ነቲናተይ ስላይድ በእንግሊዝ እውን ኣለዎ ብዙሓት ትግርኛ ይርዳእኩም ንኸውን ግን ቀሲለ ስለ ዝዛረብ ክርዳእኩም ክፍትኒ ቅድሚ ኣተሰዓታት ገጹ መለስ ዜናዊ ንህዝቢ ትግራይ እንኳዕ ኻባኻትኩም ተፈጠርና እንኳዕ ኻባኻትኩም ተወለድና ኢሉ ክዛረብ ዝከረኒ ኣብቲ ግዜ እቲ ብዙሕ ኣስተውህሎ ይገበርኩሉን ምክንያቱ ኩሉ ሰብ ካብ ሓደ ቦታ ስለ ዝፍጠር ግን ኣብዚ ግዜ ህዝቢ ትግራይ እዚ ዘይበሃል ግፍዒ እዚ ዘይበሃል ፀገም ክረክብ ከሎ ሰብኣዩ ሰበይቱ ዓቢኡ ንእሽትኡ ቆልዑ ኣረጊቱ ካህኑ ሸኹ ብሓንሳብ ከም ሓደ ሰብ ኮይኑ ንገፋዒኡ ቃለስ ክሪኦ ከለኹ ከምኡውን ቶም ጀጋኑ ደቁ ኣብ ውሽጢ ቶም ዓበይትን ቶም ቆልዑ ንኣሽቱን ብሓባር ንህዝቦምን ንሃገሮምን ንምሕድሓን እዚ ዘይበሃል ቃልሲ ክገብሩ ከለዉ ከምኡውን ኣብ ደገ ዘለዎ ተጋሩ ኣብ ዲያስፖራ ዘለዎ ተጋሩ ከምኒ HPN ኣብ ውሽጢ 7 ወርሒ ዝኣመሰለ ስራሓት ንህዝቦም ከዓ ድምፂ ክኾኑ ክሪኦ ከለኹ ናይ መለስ ዜናዊ ኣዘራርባ ይርዳእኒ ስለዚ ክትኮርዑን ክትዕጎሱን ግባኣኩም እዚ ኣብ ስእሊ ትሪእዎ ዘለኹም ቅድሚ ቁሩብ መዓልቲ ዝሞተ ወደሞ እዩ my cousin ኣብቲ ውግእ ብሕፅነት ብስእነት መድሃኒት ብስእነት ኦክሲጅን እዩ ሞይቱ ኣሕዋቱ እውን ከቀብርዎን ኣይከኣሉን ስለዚ ኣብ ትግራይ ብውግእ ጥራሕ ዘይኮነሲ ብጥሜት ካልእ ምክንያታት እውን ዝሞቱ ብዙሓት እዮም ስለዚ ኣብ እቲ ስላይድ ክኣቱ تايدا خوين مغيار أبيني. I cannot change the slide. What happened? Yeah. كل جزء أب ناتنا قربة فلسفنا خيرية ناتنا الرأية مس هايمانوتنا تتحازي هجي كم فوستي كم حقايم كنحاسب كلنا مجمر يا وساني مسمعك بحاليوتن بسعتاني مخنياتو نتي كنحكمون للسب نتي كنحجزون للسب كنسب ما كنا لنا بإنجليزي حيفي اللي بتتحتي أقداسيو to listen with empathy and quietness مخنياتو أسيوتي وساني بزحات سبع كاب كلت كسمعوا دخلوا ونيرلو. Next slide please. I cannot. كالو تشجر أبتجر بشجر أبتجراي له مزعاري مزوارك بصنعات بتعجستني كبيري زخونات هذلو بقليلو تفاع خلان جن مزوار بزي نتي حساب تشجر سلازلازح أي أخل نخال إسرح كجبري الكام خالونا له جن مزوار أزيو وساني زخاء بصنعات بتعجستني. Next slide. كاو اتصال سايكا كلنا أب حكمنا هنا تقولنا أب نيرس نكون كلنا سايكولوجيست نكون كلنا نعنا دفعنا نخالق نحجزي محجز كا بفقرن برهراهن كل جزء نتتعجزو سب فقرن برهراهن كل وكالو بإنجليزي نقولوا توم قالوا تقريني هذا يسمعوا أنت خمس بتزور له وتدخل لهم. next. دحريو مفلات كا بزي فلتات حانت نجار كنقبرين خلينا فلتات والثاني نوزخون نجار نحن فتت جن كنسرحن كنسعرن بسعرن بتحتناني مسألة كل فلتات فريهاز جابي هيرو بوتاتنا سلذي كل جزء hard working humility مخانيو زون أقداسيو. next كاو مرداء قد لينا نتحموم تايزو بالتامس دلوزو سباتي لنا مرداء ديلنا خرداء بأمرون بمستوى علينا تمرتي كاب مهرو أمرو يبلبوتاتنا مخنياتو كل جزء مرداء أدلايو بأمرو بمستوى عالكن ريقول لنا زخون النقر. next slide. دحري مفواس مالتيو مفواس كا بتنقعن بجبت بتخونه بتبروني إذا خا قداسي مخنياتو نايسب هيوس لزخونه نزيوك نحجزو سب كنت تنقع بزي متنا أدلايو. next slide. مودة أتاخ شابع عايمة التي شوعات نقراتي وسيدي the 7th مدحاني يتسهيل مدحان كا بمدحانيتن بابنتين أبانا مدحاني ألم حركاولو كم تبت مجمر يا سيد دراخمون ناتنا نعلم ريتو أزيو مسناي هايمانتنا ذات أساسري جن أنا next حكيمي سلذي كم حكيم متن البيولوجي ذات مسرت رئيتو نحمامات أمرو كم تايمز بحلفو كواز ناي حمام جنكتن حمام صاد غزانتن ويناي سمعت حمامات تباهي جزء واي زي مبزعتو جزي أب هيبوتالاموس تباهيلو أب زرع أميجدالا أبزيد سفري تي نوصتات لوطتات next slide please. أبزي كل جزء أمونغو أب ناتنا أمرو كاب 1 مليون لعلي ناي نيرف هواسات اللو زياتهم كان نحدهم بنعشتو جمدات تأساسوريو نحدهم كا حبار نجر وي مونو امينز وي امينو اسيد سبهاد يتحللفو زوم اب حمامات امرو بحلفي اب حمامات ጭንቀትን اب حمام صاد غزانتن وانا تبهيلون تصوعوا هرمونز وي سيروتونين دوبامين نودرادرينالين كومون بزح غزي حساب استيل كولين አለው ካልኦት ካብ ሓንጎልና ዝፍልፍሉ ህዋሳት ወይ ውሽጣዊ ነዝዒ ሆርሞንስ አለው ሳቶም ከዓ ኮርቲሶን ሜላቶኒን ፕሮላክቲን ይባሃሉ ናይዚኦም ወይ ሙሓድዩ ወይ አሞንጎኦም ዘሎ ሚዛን ምስናወፅዩ ወይ ከዓ መልእኽቲ ሓባሪ ነገር ተቐባሊ ነገር ምስ ባላሾዩ next slide እዚ እቲ ነርቭ ሰልዩ ነንሕድሕዶም ክትኣሳሰሩ ከሎ ኣብዚ እቲ ሓባሪ ነገር ማለት ኒውሮትራንስሚተርስ ብእንግሊዝ እዚ ከዓ እቲ ሪሴፕተር እዩ ኣብዚ እቲ ጌጋታት ኩሉ ግዜ ዝኸውን next slide እቲ ዋና መልእኽቲ the major message እቲ ቀንዲ መልእኽቲ ኣብቲ መጀመርያውን ዮዲት ከም ዝበለቶ حمام قزانتن حمام ጭንቀትን ክፍወስ ዝኽእል ምዃኑ ምግላጽ እዩ መድሃኒት ኣለዎ ናይ ማሕበር ዓለም ማሕበር ጥዕና ኣብ ዓለም 3 ክሳብ 4 ከሚቲ ናይ ህዝቢ حمام ጭንቀት 3 ክሳብ 4 ከሚቲ ናይ ህዝቢ حمام ቅዛነት ኣለዎ ካብ ግዚኦም ግን ካብ 76 ክሳብ 86 ኣይ ሕክምናን እንታይ ማለት እዩ ክልተ ካብ 10 ጥራሕ መድሃኒት ዝረኽቡ ካልኦት መድሃኒት ኣይረኽቡን ስለዚ ብዘይ መጠን ወሰን እዩ ነቲ ናትና ሕብረተሰብ እዚ መድሃኒት ክሕከም ምኽኣሉ ምፍላጥ next slide ሕጂ ብዙሕ ግዜ ኣብዚ ግዜ እዚ ግን ከነተኩሮ ዘለና ሓደ ካብ ናይ ጭንቀታት ነገራት ብዛዕባ መጥቃዕትን ዲና እዚ ፖስት ትራውማቲክ ስትረስ ዲስኦርደር በሃል ወይ ጉድኣት መጥቃዕቲ ዘስዕቦ ውጥረት እዩ እዚ በቲ ሓደ ወገን ኦፍ ኮርስ ኩሉ ነገር ናብ ህይወትና ዘጋጥመና ሓደ ዓይነት ሽግር ፈጥረና ወይ ብተፈጥሮ ክኸውን ይኽእል እዩ ወይ ከም ኣብ ትግራይ ሕጂ ዝኸውን ዘሎ ብናይ ወዲ ሰብ ዝፈጥሮ መዓት ምዃኑ እዩ next slide በዚ ሕማም እዚ ብዙሕ ፎከስ ተገበርና ኣድላይ እዩ ምክንያቱ እንታይ ከመይ ግለጽ ከመይ መድሃኒት ብዙሕ ኣይከይድን ግዜ ብልናን ካልእ ግዜ ግን ምናልባት ኣጋጣሚ ተተረኺቡ ብዛዕባ እዚ ሕማም ፎከስ ጌርና ሓደ ሰሚናር ተገበርና ጽቡቕ መስለኒ ሕጂ እዚ ሓንሳብቲ ኩነታት እንታይ ትገፋዕ ሰብ ወፃኢ ካብ ወፃኢ ዝመፀ ወይ ኢንቨደር እንድሕር ኮይኑ እቲ ክገብሮ ዝፈትን ነቲ ሰብ ምጥፉእ ጥራሕ ኣይኮነን ከምኡውን ንወዲ ሰብ ትርጉም ዝህቦ እምነት ንሰብ ዝገብሮ ባህልን ስርዓትን ኣገባብን ብሂላትን ኩሉ ነገር ፀጋታትን ንምዕናው ደይ መደይ ተባሂሉ ዝስራሕ ዓላማን ስለዝኾነ እቲ ናቱ ዓላማ ንሰብ ኣንነቱን መንነቱን ምጽናትን ተስፋ ከም ዝቆርጽ ምግባር እዩ ስለዚ ኣድላይ እዚ ጀኖሳይድ ምዃኑ ምፍላጥ ካልኣይ ዝኸኣተ ኣሎ ሓንሳብ እቲ ገፋዕ ነገር ግን ገፋዕ ሰብ ግን ሓንሳብ እቲ ክከላኸለለ ኢልካ ትሓስቦ እዩ እቲ ንዓይ ክሕግዘኒ ኢልካ ትሓስቦ እዩ ወይ ኣብ ቤተሰብካ ክኸውን ይኽእል እዩ ሕጂ ንኣብነት ከምኡ እንድሕር ኮይኑ እቲ ዝግፍዑ ሰብ ሓንሳብ ንነፍሱ ነቲ ምእዙ ዝኸውን ማለት ነቲ ገፍዓዩ ከም ጊላ ከዓ ኮይኑ ይቕበሎ ሕጂ ንኣብነት ኣብ ኤሪትራ ዘሎ ኩነታት እዩ እቲ መግለፂ ምክንያቱ እቶም ዝገፍዕዎም ዘለዉ ነቲ ህዝቢ ኤሪትራ ክከላኸሉልና ኢሎም ዝሓስብዎም ዝነበሩ ሰባት እዮም ኔክስት ስላይድ ኣብዚ እውን እቲ ቁርብ ክጠቕሶ ዝደሊ እዚ እውን መድሃኒት ኣለዎ ትሪትመንት ኣለዎ ብተገንዝቦ ጠባይ ዝእረም ሓበራዊ ፈውሲ ኣሎ ኮግኒቲቭ ቢሄቪራል ተራፒ ዘይመጠን ኣድላይ እዩ ክንዛረበሉ ንኽእል ኢና ካልእ እዚ ትምህርቲ ምሕዋስ ጥበብ ቲችንግ ሪካቨሪ ቴክኒክስ ዝብልዎ ኣሎ ኣብ 8 ክሳብ 10 መንእሰያት ብሓንሳብ ኣኪብካ ንክልተ ሰዓት ብክልተ ሓኻይም ዝርርብ ብምግባር ኣብ ሩዋንዳ ብዙሓት ሃገራት ተፈተነ እዩ ከምኡ እውን መድሃኒታት ኣሎ ፍሎክሲቲን ሰርትራሊን ፕሮላክሲን እውን ክጠቅም ከም ዝኽእል ይፍለጥ እዩ ከምኡ እውን ፈውሲ ቅልጡፍ ምንቅስቃስ ዓይንቲ ኣይ ሙቭመንት ዲሰንሲታይዜሽን ሪፕሮሰሲንግ ቴራፒ ዝብልዎ ኢትካ ከምዚ እንዳገበርካ እቲ ቴራፒስት ንሓፂር ግዜ ኣዝዩ ዝጠቅም ከም ዝኾኑ ዝተረጋገፀ እዩ እዚታት ክንመሃሮ ክንደጋግሞ ንኽእል ኢና ናይ መወዳእታ ከዓ እቲ ናይ ሓበራዊ ናይ ፈውሲ ቤተሰብ ብሓንሳብ ኮንካ ምዝራብ ምክንያቱ ኣድላሲ እቲ ቤተሰብ ብዛዕባ እቲ ሕማም ፍልጠትን ተገንዝቦን ክህልዎ ብዘይ መጠን ኣድላሲ ኣነ ኣብዚ ክዕፅየ ምክንያቱ እቲ ፕሮግራም ነዊሕ ስለ ዝኾነ from now on I will be speaking in English and if you want me to say something in English I will do that but I have thank you very much for listening.
Dr. Tedros, thank you so much. Can you share the name of your book? There's someone that's interested.
Yes, it's called, can I send a copy of it to the one who is interested? I can send it online. Anybody who is here, all who are here who want a copy of the book, send your email and I'll send you a PDF copy of the book.
Fantastic. Okay. Or maybe you can even, if you'd like, send it to our organizers. And
I have sent it to Meron and I have said that you can use it the way you fit. I do not have any, you can reproduce it, all of it, part of it, to the benefit of the people of Tigray for non-profitable purposes.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I noticed the EMDR treatment, which is becoming more popularized in the US as a way to help folks to heal from post-traumatic stress disorder. I also heard your message of resilience. My Tigrinya is not that good, Dr. Tedros, but I picked up on your important message of resilience. And we thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. You all, we're pleased to welcome our next speaker, and that is Dr. Ayoda, who will come to us to talk about her testimony as well as an update on the Wellness Center that's being created. And speakers, if you, at the top of your screen, there's the view options button. If you would like to control the slides yourself under view options, you can select request remote control and it'll give you control. You all, Dr. Ayoda is an internal medicine resident who lives in Tennessee. She's very interested in global health and health equity, both locally and internationally. She is a co-leader of the HPN4Tigray Resource Mobilization Subcommittee and in the establishment of the HPN Wellness Center in Sudan. She traveled to Sudan and just returned, where she was visiting with a group of other healthcare professionals. Dr. Ayoda?
Hey guys, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Let me see if I can control the screen. Maybe. First of all, I would like to apologize because I'm just getting over a cold. So my voice may be a little raspy. And I was chanting very loudly at the Nashville protest today. So another reason to be a little raspy today. So excuse if I need to cough in the middle or if my voice is a little raspy today. So I wanted to discuss about the Student Wellness Center, and I wanted to give on the ground report. I travel with a group of doctors, with Dr. Tigis, Dr. Salamoon, and I. So I just wanted to give a little bit of our experience and our testimony and an update of the Wellness Center. So just to give you, next slide, please. So just to give you a little update or a little background information, since the war started on November 4th, I think this is a day none of us will forget. There have been over 60,000 externally displaced refugees from Tigray currently living in Sudan, and by some estimates, it's closer to 80,000 actually. These refugees are distributed among 4 places. The largest is Tanedwa, which is a refugee camp in Sudan. Rakuba comes second, Hamdait, and Hashaba. So we went to the top 3, Tanedwa, Rakuba, and Hamdait. Hamdait is actually considered a transition center because it's so close to the border. There's not an official refugee camp there. It's a place where refugees come in to get registered, and then they get dispersed among the other 3 camps. But as you can see, it itself is hosting about 14,000 people. Next slide, please. So unfortunately, this is not the first time war has displaced people throughout the world. Refugees are not new. And there have been a few studies that have been published on refugees, especially focusing on trauma on the youth and children. And it showed that trauma in children is ingrained on a molecular level almost, and it's lifelong, and it doesn't really go away unless we are very intentional and are able to address it early on. And the way to do this is through structured group activity, such as whether it's sports or different types of opportunity where you can help children build social connections. And then that can help them kind of reduce the risk of risky and self-destructive behavior. Play therapy is also another crucial aspect of, way of dealing with trauma. And the reason is it's different from the way we normally think about therapy, which is a general, sitting down in a chair and counseling. But whenever we're dealing with the youth, we have to be very creative and make sure we address mental health and teach children to cope with the trauma of all the things that are happening. So knowing these studies, next slide, please. We had a proposal, and our proposal was to build a wellness center. And the reason for the wellness center is to address mental health and encourage and build resilience and overall wellness in our youth. And this center includes various things such as sports and games such as soccer and volleyball, or even chess and checkers, music therapy, arts and crafts, and then the traditional forms of counseling in telehealth format, not only for counseling, but also to teach locals how to recognize and treat different manifestations of mental health. Our first project was planned to be in Tanedba, which is the largest camp in Sudan right now. Next slide, please. So we quickly collaborated with a number of organizations, the largest being the ECDC. And ECDC itself was trying to engage the youth in various ways. The way they saw they were going to do it is through computer literacy and building libraries to engage the youth. We We also collaborated with Save the Children and St. Michael's Church, which were going to help us procure the land where we were going to build the center, and HPN4Tigray, who were going to help us procure some of the things that we were going to need for the center. Next slide, please. So the three of us embarked on this journey. The reason we wanted to go and see for ourselves is, one, we didn't want to approach it with a savior's mentality. We wanted to make sure that the needs assessment came from the ground itself. We wanted to, and the way we did this is through talking to the community leaders, talking to teachers, healthcare providers, and random samplings of the youth and the population that are in these camps as well. And the next few slides are direct quotes. I didn't see the need to mince any words. These are the things that were told to us, and we decided we should share the trauma that these people are going through. I'm gonna read it verbatim. My 2-year-old son can't go to sleep without a knife in his hands since the soldiers came to our town. Depression and anxiety are widespread problems in these camps. Most of the patients I see present with psychosomatic complaints. We've been abandoned by our country, and now I feel like we're being abandoned by God too. And this was after the rainstorms in Tanedwa. Next slide, please. These girls are made to believe that the rape was their fault, that if they were born Amhara or if they recanted their ethnicity, that this wouldn't be happening to them. They're told by their rapists that they should be thankful that they weren't killed instead, because they've seen those that resisted be killed in front of them. These women have been traumatized in every way, but when you ask about how they're doing, they respond, "At least I'm alive." Next slide. Our young boys are being targeted by smugglers. They're being told that they, meaning the smugglers, can help them cross to Europe or entice them by money-making opportunities. And these boys are disappearing from our camps. We don't know where they are. We have a number of tents that are now empty because of events like this. These young kids are getting into self-destructive behaviors such as alcohol, tobacco, and even gambling. These are not bad kids. These are some of the stories that have been echoed multiple times throughout the different camps that we've been through. But despite all this trauma, next slide, please. We still saw signs of resilience as well in there. And pictures speak 1,000 words. And I decided to share some of the images I saw, which are signs of resilience. I'm gonna read this. It says, Mot jaganuna yaharina nambar, ambar kakhanan, translated roughly as the death of our heroes drives us and makes us stronger. It does not make us kneel. Next slide. Bahay belkum, kinmillasina na'addina, mandina. And this says, don't be happy. We'll return to our country. Who do you think we are? So these are some of the signs of resilience that we saw. And our goal was to foster this resilience. Next slide. And we were trying to do this through our wellness center. So the design on the right side, or I don't know which one this is, the ground floor plans are the actual plans for our center. This is going to be combined with ECDC. So together with the library and the classrooms, we're going to build a center where we'll have an activity center, counseling classroom, and then different rooms for arts and crafts as well. And the image on the left, or the other side, the real picture, is an example of what our center would look like. As you can see, it's more sturdy and it's not going to be blown away by the rainstorms as it happened in Tanedwa. And we estimate that this would cost us about 25 to 30 grand total. Next slide. So while we were there, because it's going to take about 2 to 4 weeks for our center to be built, we decided to share some of the things we took with us for the center with the different schools that were there. And these are some of the images from those schools where the children were very excited to get all these toys and all these different things that they could just play with and be with each other. Next slide. We also took balls, jerseys, and different things. And this is our boys soccer team. And next slide. And this is our girls soccer versus volleyball team. I don't think they've decided in this picture, but whatever they decide to be, we'll allow them to be both if they want to. So next slide. So our goal is to create a safe space for our youth to heal. This is not for an escape, but this is to just give them a tool to cope with their current unfortunate circumstances. So thank you for your time. The rest of our team, Hegus and Gabrahewat, were not able to join us for the trip, but they were working tirelessly behind the scenes as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Ayota, and thank you for your heart for our young people. I love how you talked about play as an antidote to pain and to the experience that the children are having. And I love that you put their beautiful faces and kind of brought them here with us. Thank you so much. There was a question, it actually came shortly after Dr. Tedros spoke, but I wonder if you might have a thought, and it was about how we support our elders abroad. Can you share anything about your travels and your experience or your perspective to that question?
So how we support our elders. So thank God we live as a community. We were always community oriented. So everyone there like gathers and they support each other in every way possible. There are ways I think we can kind of help support them do that, because everybody gets rations and everybody's sharing whatever they have with these elderly folks. But there's a lot of work to do, but we live as a community, we struggle as a community, and that's what we're doing over there too.
Yeah, thank you for uplifting that collective care that is indigenous to our culture, right? It's what we do, and the reminder to continue doing that. Again, thank you so much for being here and for the fantastic presentation. My agenda says we're going to move into a short break where we're going to have an opportunity for the first time to see some of our sponsors, the art and merchandise in the auction. There is a silent auction happening today. So you should be seeing soon enough the slides as well as a link for where you can support. And yes, I would be delighted to share our sponsors. And if you wouldn't mind pulling that slide up, there we are. So we have Soraya Coffee, thank you. Be Well Women's Health, Array, Conjo, My Mescal, My Baby, Black Men Read. Let's see here. I got to get the slide a little bit bigger. There we go. Beautiful book, Mills Tigrayan Lessons. And did I miss anyone? Te Shalema and Finding Destiny. Thank you to all of our partners and sponsors. Did I miss anyone? Fantastic. And would we like to share some of the silent auction items as well? And maybe a little bit of explanation of how the bidding begins.
And hi, everybody. This is Dr. Meron Mashasha. I'll do a quick little intro about what the art auction will look like. We actually will be dropping in the chat what website we'll be using for the art auction, and we'll actually be able to text, which we'll drop in the chat as well, how to start. So we're just gonna basically kind of do a quick slideshow. It'll be about 5 minutes with music playing. We'll include our art that we have donated to us by our amazing artists, as well as merchandise that was donated and some services. So it'll be silent, we'll have music playing. We'll kind of click through the slides so you guys can see this. But again, we're going to be showing this again tomorrow, as well as you can click on the link and slowly look through everything and see what you want to bid on. So I know everybody may have already tried to click on the website. So if you're having any confusion, please feel free to email us. But basically, you go to the auction. When you first click on the website, you'll go to auction items, and you'll see all of the things that we displayed here today, all in order. You can click on the tab that says View Details. And from that tab, you put in place a bid. Once you place a bid, there's a minimum amount that you have to bid above. And once you do that, you place the bid, you add it to your cart so that you can bid on multiple items at once. This auction is going to be going on for, I think if you saw on the main screen, about 3 weeks. So you have plenty of time. We'll be promoting it. But if you have any questions, feel free to drop in the chat. We can answer it or email us. And then we'll go back to Gide as our next speaker.
Thank you, Meron. Gide, we're very glad to have you here. Is there a slide for Gide?
Yes, I think she's pulling it up right now.
Fantastic. And bless you.
Thank you, Yodi.
Thank you, Sara. You all, our next speaker, Gide Maza, is a licensed marriage and family therapist who strives to bring an effective blend of experience, clarity, empathy, and action to the counseling process in order to experience beneficial outcomes and provide authentic healing and wholeness to individuals, families, and communities. Gide is also a member of the HPN4Tigray subcommittee, Wellness and Mental Health. Welcome, welcome, Gide.
Thank you, Yodi. And by the way, that was a fancy intro. I haven't seen that intro in a while, so I appreciate it. Before I share my journey, I'd like to offer up something to the whole group. I mean, there's almost 90 of us in this group. Dr. Ayoda did an excellent slide presentation, and it was also heavy, y'all. So if we have a minute, what I'd like to do is, if you have access to turning your camera on, turn your camera on. And from there, what I would also like is everybody to, if you can, stand up. I want to break up some of what we're hearing and experiencing in this space right now. And however you take a breath, I'd like you to take 3 large breaths. And we're going to do this as a group. There's no right or wrong way to breathe. Just breathe deep, feel it where you need to feel it, and we'll go from there. And as we're doing these breaths, I'd like to offer up a check-in that I'd like everybody to do with themselves. And if you'd like to share your check-in in the box, you are welcome to. So as you're breathing, I want you to think physically, how is my body feeling right now? And feel that. Are your shoulders tense? Are your eyes stationary? Are they rapid? Is your breathing shallow? Is it deep? Is it fast? Is it slow? Intellectually, so my mind, how is my mind doing right now? Emotionally, how am I doing? So where are my feelings? What are my feelings or feelings that I'm feeling right now? And sit in it. Spiritually, how am I doing? And I'm going to bring us back. You're welcome to take a seat as I speak. You're welcome to stand as I speak, to wiggle as I speak. And the last thing I'd like you to ask yourself is, what do I need right now? Because I can almost bet you what I need and what we need is what our people need. And with that being said, I'll jump into the who I am and preface it with saying, last night I was trying to think about, well, what do I say? Where do I start in my story? Where do I start in my mother's story? Right? All these cycling thoughts. And then I called my mother and I said, hey, listen, I'm going to be in the chat on behalf of our people and for our people. What do I say? And my mother tells me, tell the truth. I'm gonna say that again. She told me, tell the truth. And I said, well, what is the truth? And she said, Gide, just tell the truth. And because my story is your mother, my story as a woman, a Tigray woman, an Ethiopian woman is so personal. Don't share everything of our story. And I'm gonna honor that for my mother and my siblings. So I'm gonna give you a brief glimpse of my journey from Tigray into Sudan, into the States, and eventually landing in Fresno, California, the Central Valley. And hopefully the picture that I paint will show you and inform you why I do the work that I do currently in my city, throughout the state, and also the country, with specifically young African Black men as the center of my work. So before I'm a son of Tigray, I'm the son of Deganesh Kaasa Gerba Selassie, the father of Halim Kiel Maaza. And I'm the oldest of 6 siblings, the oldest brother to Mimi, Saba, Martha, Danny, Sarah. I'm a father to Caleb and Caden and Elaine. I'm a husband to Antoinette, a community member, and all of that. But before any of that, I'm a human. So my story started in the 80s with my mother. And our family sprinkled between Gondor, Walkai, Shere, and a little bit of everything in between. And the brief glimpse that I'll give y'all is from about 82, being about 2 years old, and 85, to when we came to the States. And in brief, you know, the most significant impact that's been had on me is my mother's literal walk from Ethiopia at the height of the war and the famine. And I'm going to say that again, her walk. She used her feet to carry me and her into Sudan, potentially multiple times before we were able to meet our aunt and uncle, partly in refugee camps, and then eventually into our own home for 2 years, which leads into 85, and not only being displaced, but being refugees, but also, and I say this very lovingly and caringly, and it's the words of my mother, but being saved when there was no chance to be saved. Saved me physically from death. I almost died one time on that trip. And then creating a legacy here in the States. So from Sudan, and at the time, I mean, y'all know the history. So in Sudan, I don't want to go to too much detail. We were sponsored by a church, one of the few families at that time. So it was myself. By 85, it was myself, my 2 sisters, mother and father. We were sponsored and dropped right into the Midwest, and not only the Midwest, but specifically Chicago, Illinois, which at the time we had an uncle in a very small Ethiopian community. And what was interesting about my upbringing from Sudan, speaking multiple languages, to being dropped in about 4, 5 years old into Chicago was I was that foreign kid, spoke a whole bunch of languages in this really cold land, and lived in the projects and one of the more violent spaces in Chicago at that time in the 80s. And I'm sure y'all know the history of the crack era and the damage that was being done there. And we as a refugee family came into that space. And the only way that we survived that space, and I've heard this word multiple times, especially in Chicago, was we're a collective community. So I had an uncle who didn't live too far away from the projects that we were in. And literally the next set of flight of stairs was cousins of ours. So I was always surrounded by community. We lived in Chicago for a few years, and my parents decided, based on our cousins moving to California and specifically the Central Valley, that we were going to move to the Central Valley. And at the time that we came here to Fresno, there was a super vibrant, live, engaged, but also very, very private Ethiopian community that understood how to resource itself financially, socially, emotionally through whatever times that we were going through. So we land in the terrain of the Central Valley, which is ag-based. Fresno and the surrounding counties are known as the breadbasket of the world, which is very, very symbolic for me because we came from being starved to being in a city, in a county that flourishes in growing food. And from there, I want to be clear that part of why I do what I do as a therapist and how I move is really informed by like what I experienced in my specific community here in Fresno. So we were our therapeutic container. I think I mentioned everything from financial, social, emotional, shelter space was what really carried me throughout my life. My mom is known as the cook in the community. And I think, you know, I'm going to be biased, the best cook in the community. So her skill set was always cooking, and our house came to be like what I describe as the underground railroad for Ethiopians. And if you didn't have a space to stay, leave, or you were stressed out about where to go get what you needed to get, you always knew that you'd come eat and drink bunna, a lot of bunna, and break bread about what resources are out there. So my home was always that safe space. And mind you, my family was at that point 8 of us in a 3-bedroom home, but we always had a space for somebody to come get grounded and centered. So in brief, to wrap all that up, why I do what I do is exactly because of what I experienced from Tigray into Sudan into the States, and understanding that like a collective healing is really, really dependent on, and I saw that from firsthand experience, really dependent on who is around us and what resources that we can really connect with each other on. I've been in private practice now 2 years, and I come from a very non-traditional therapeutic space. I don't believe in interventions more than I believe in relationships and creating the container, because I trust that whatever is going on for the individual, as long as the space is created, they work through what they need to work through. I worked through what I needed to work through because the space was available to me. And my work wasn't pretty at all. My healing isn't finished at all. I haven't arrived, but I stand firm in that level of truth. for anybody, but very specifically for our people. You know, we are a very, very resilient people. We're a people of stillness. We're a people of very deep spiritual wisdom that carries us. So it's a little bit about me. I will open it up to any questions, Yodi. Whatever works, y'all let me know.
Fantastic. So many pearls, so many jewels you dropped there. We were and are our therapeutic container. Thank you for that, brother. We are a people of stillness, of deep spiritual belief. Thank you for that. Thank you also for reminding us to get into our bodies and to notice where we are feeling our emotions, not just at the cognitive level, but in our bodies. And folks were able to tap into, like, I feel it tight in my heart and in my shoulders. And so much of, as you note, so much of mental health is kind of rooted in cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'm so grateful for the invitation for the embodied practice. I also really appreciate you uplifting this as a journey and not a destination, and inviting us to sit in the messiness of our trauma and our healing. We do have time just for one question, G'day. And listen, I love your mama. She like, don't tell all our business now. Don't be. You did an honor to her. Folks, if you have a question, we have just a few seconds. If you want to put that into chat, comments, of course, are welcome. And then if not, if I don't see them shortly, we're going to move just to honor our time. We've got some great speakers. We're going to prepare to welcome Professor Brent Diaz, talking about intergenerational trauma. I'll just wait a moment before we bring Dr. Brent. Here we go. One question. What has been, and if you'll just take a minute or so, okay, G'day. What has been your experience counseling older Tigray people, especially regarding marriage counseling, given its stigma? And there is one other question about how do we deal with gaslighters? So kind of two different important questions. One, our elders again, and then how do we deal with folks that are gaslighting us?
By the way, my expertise is not marriage counseling. However, I think getting our folks in the habit of working on our own individual stuff that we bring to our marriage and our relationship is absolutely the foundation to marriage wellness, right? And being aware of what we bring. And I got to be clear, I come from the world and space of we know what we need, whether it's our marriages, our communal health. We know what we need. We just need to get some of that trauma parked for a minute sometimes, and also just work through and massage out. And Yodi, what was that other question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, a lot of us are being gaslit right now amid everything that's happening. What advice would you have for dealing with gaslighters is the question. And maybe to your earlier comment about what we can control, right, which is ourselves, maybe that's a way to enter that response.
You know, everyone does really, really, really odd things from their pain, right? Our point of reference, our pain. Gaslighters are hurt people. And oftentimes they need the most attention, and they'll pull from it, however. But then when we look at our individual realm of control, that's where we say, what are our boundaries? What are we willing to take and not take? Right? I hope that answers that question.
I think that's perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. And we hope you'll continue to stay for this delightful series of presentations. Brent, can I bring you up?
Yes, please.
Fantastic. You all, Professor Brenton Diaz is a trauma therapist who works with refugees and newcomers to Canada. He also teaches at universities on trauma and mental health in places like Canada, Lithuania, Ukraine, and has taught and consulted with trauma services in Rwanda, Malawi, and Kenya. Brent is also one of the co-leaders alongside 2 psychiatrists and a team of therapists within the HPN4Tigray initiative on mental health, where they support and develop training and support group models for communities in Tigray and refugees in Sudan. We're so glad you're with us and welcome the opportunity to hear you talk about intergenerational trauma, Brent. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. And it's such an honor to be here in the midst of these wonderful speakers that we have in this incredible event. I'm really stricken by the intimacy of this event so far. And being invited to speak at that is a huge honor. Like being able to be a part of this, it's a huge, huge honor for me. I think it's, it's apparent that I'm not from Tigray. I don't have family from Tigray or any kind of connection that way. And so again, to be invited into this space where your people are working on healing, yeah, it means a lot to me. So thank you so much for having me. There's so much that I could say about this topic, and I know that there's a short amount of time, and I can be long-winded, so I'm going to try my best to kind of keep things really contained here. But one thing I wanted to mention is that there are a lot of different people that I work with who have also gone through genocide. And one of the things I wanted to mention is that this aspect of the ongoing impact of genocide and of the kinds of experiences that your people are going through right now, it's not just something that's going to be addressed right now. There's going to be an ongoing effect, right? And this is something that we'll look at, but at the same time, there's also a lot of hope. And so I kind of wanted to convey that. The one last thing I wanted to say before I kind of launch into the slides is that, again, not being part of the community, hopefully I can somehow in this event represent all of those people who aren't from your community, who are also concerned, who are also horrified about the things that we hear about on the news and the things that you're sharing firsthand about different experiences you and your loved ones have had. And, as a human being, I just care about that stuff, right? And I care about what's happening with your people. So I just wanted to affirm that, kind of like a voice from the outside, supporting the community from behind, frankly, loving you all and just wanting to share any resources that I have. So that's an important message that I wanted to share. Okay, so moving on now to my slides are a little bit, I don't know. I wish I did a better job with them, but nevertheless, in terms of intergenerational trauma, there's a couple of quotes here. The impact of a trauma, such as behavior patterns, symptoms, and values that appeared in one generation, will not only affect the generation that was victimized, so the people it happened to, but also the next one. And we've got all kinds of different examples across history of this happening. And for instance, the African-American population in America maybe is a really easy one to kind of pull from, right? That a lot of you will understand. So this idea of trauma that's happened to someone, it continues on through the generations, all right? Unless, like someone mentioned earlier, unless it's specifically intervened on and spoken about. So trauma can be passed down to children born after the trauma, whether or not survivors talk about the trauma. And the interesting thing about that lineup of different countries that I've had a chance to work in and do things with, many of those countries have experienced genocide, whether it was maybe 2 or 3 generations ago, or just like in the last generation, like in Rwanda. And so I've had the experience of working with different people who've had this impact. And so it's really, really interesting to see, and I think really important to flag right now for the people of Tigray. So the long-range impact of trauma doesn't always lead to symptoms, but it may have a more general effect on the family as a whole. Members of a traumatized family might, for instance, demonstrate limited or absent emotional expression, right? That kind of like that stoic face that I see in different populations, for sure. Maybe there's a lack of genuine connection or true closeness within the family. I'm not going to say too much, of course, about anybody I work with, clients, for confidentiality, but I do work with people who have experienced a very, very kind of well-known genocide. And the clients that I'm working with are sharing this with me. The individual, they're saying that I don't really have a connection to my family. Even though they relied on each other for survival during the genocide that they experienced, the impact of the trauma continues to impact those family relationships. So something to think about and to be aware of. Boundaries can be fixed and problem solving can be impaired, and there can be distortions in the family's reality and rules. And I feel like I've seen this too in different populations where there's like a whole narrative that's built up that it's distorted. So it's not really necessarily based on a truth, but it's based on this idea of the trauma they've experienced and how this impacts the way that they see the world, the way that they see themselves even, right? So again, another important piece to think about. However, with trauma, there's also this idea of resilience. And I know that's already been spoken about in various ways today. So resilience is the ability of an individual to recover and bounce back after a significant impact. And one thing, and I think that you're seeing this in your communities. I mean, when I saw the slides from Sudan, the refugee camp there, and you see the people, you see the children smiling, you see the people, you know, working on things, getting things going. The majority of survivors do recover from traumatic events, with relatively small numbers of survivors having actual PTSD symptoms that emerge. And so there's incredible resilience. There's incredible resilience in your people. The little bit that I've learned about the Tigray people in the last months, there's a history there. There's a history of survival, a history of deep spirituality, like G'day said. Incredible things going on. It's part of the history that's really important to acknowledge and to draw from as a people. And you don't need me to tell you this, but I'm just reminding you, right? Like I'm just saying, you have this strength as a people, and you have this history. And sorry, I was muted there, not by myself. Is a piece that you can kind of build upon with your own culture. All right, trying to be quick with my time here. Let me go to the next slide if I can. Actually, yeah, there we go. Let me just make sure. Yes, thank you. Okay, so intergenerational trauma transmission through families. So how does this trauma get passed down, in other words, right? So the intergenerational impact of trauma is unintentionally handed down. It's not like our parents are trying to you know, make us feel a certain way or make us suffer or make us feel their suffering. In fact, usually it's the opposite. Usually our parents are trying to say, hey, we don't want you to go through what we went through. So you know what, we're not even going to talk about it, or we're not going to even acknowledge it. A lot of times that's the way it actually plays out. But it's passed down through behavioral norms, and these are reproduced in the way the family interacts with each other. And the family doesn't really notice it's abnormal. And I feel like this has happened over and over again with different groups. Again, like I said, I could speak to you about this for 5 hours and there'd still be stuff to say, but I guess you just have to trust me on this. Like I've seen it in different family groups, different cultures, including, to be frank, my own communities that I come from. There's just different patterns that get passed down. And we don't even think about it, but yet they're actually born out of genocide, trauma, colonization, and pieces like that. So traumatization of later generations can occur through the stories shared or the lessons learned from these experiences. For example, there might be the idea of the world as a dangerous place. Like there might be that view, or maybe and there's truth to these ideas, right? So that's where it gets tricky, but maybe the idea of Tigray being oppressed, right? Or the world not caring, right? Things like that, which again, there might be some truth in terms of the way that this genocide is being experienced. But this then gets passed down even when that situation changes, right? Even when that oppression, you know, one day hopefully stops, right? So these are pieces that we need to really focus on and be aware of. So in terms of the family transmission of these patterns, emotional issues are developed and transmitted through family members' loyalty and indebtedness to each other. So isn't that beautiful? Like we learn from our families, that bond that we have, our families working together, trying to survive really, really challenging times. And there's this loyalty and indebtedness, and the children take on the issues of their parents. I know I do that, right? My family and my parents and people that went before me, like I take on the same issues that they were concerned about in terms of our family and the experiences we've been through. And it's going to be the same for you all as well too. But again, this can lead to issues when some of these pieces are influenced by the violence that your communities are experiencing. And one of the pieces that you'll notice is that there could be a lack of closure within the older generation, right? So people who've experienced horrific violence and they've had to leave their communities and their lives are disrupted. There could be a lack of closure in that experience, which can then lead to some of those kinds of patterns being passed down to the family members, like the younger generations, where the younger generations might feel unsettled or might feel like they don't have a lack of closure and something that they haven't even really necessarily experienced, right? And what also might happen is authoritarian parenting might take place, right? And these are parents who are trying to be well-meaning. They're trying to set up a structure for their families. They're trying to love their families and provide really safe guidelines. But the research has shown that sometimes this can be something that can be overdone. This idea of trying to keep your child safe from trauma can actually limit some of the experiences a child can have later on in life, right? So again, there are some really important pieces there. And I should have prefaced earlier, this is just an introduction to these ideas. I'd love to talk more with you about them. Okay, but we don't have the time. So I'm gonna just move on. Sorry, I was having a problem with the slides too. That's why I was a little distracted here. It's a little delayed. So I'm just gonna go back to silence because that's a really, really important piece. There we go. Now, Gadai also said something really, really insightful, it keeps switching for me. And that was, he said that, something along the lines of our people are quiet, and there's this idea of silence and intergenerational trauma. And I've had the opportunity to work with different cultures who have this idea of being really, really, not wanting to talk about these things. These things are unspeakable. The things that Tigray is going through are unspeakable, right? It's horrific violence. And of course, silence is a life-preserving protection. But what ends up happening is that this silence ends up causing issues in terms of the younger generations to be able to deal with it, right? And so there could be isolation, there could be wordlessness, and there could be denial or repression of what's happened. And I'm not saying that parents need to be sharing every detail about what happened to them, like what happened since November with their kids in 5 years. Like, we're not necessarily saying that, but there needs to be some kind of conversation about this. And that can be really hard for a culture that's not really used to doing that. But unfortunately, we do have some examples of other cultures, for instance, like the Rwandan culture, who also very, very private, very, very quiet in this way, who are now suffering, half or a quarter of a century after their genocide. And they're now starting to speak out more and more about it. And I'm part of that conversation with people. So it's just something to think about there and something to figure out and discuss. Here's just a list of different symptoms of different pieces. And you'll notice most of them are negative, but there's some positives, maybe like patriotism, right? But there could also be, from intergenerational trauma, a loss of faith in the kindness of other people, seeing the world as a dangerous place, anticipation of disaster, a lack of parental bonding. These are all things that came out of research. That's where I pulled them from, but I've also seen them in talking with people too. But also experiencing stigma and having a complex of this family heritage. And that's what I was trying to articulate very poorly early on, where I was saying, people of Tigray might feel, hey, like we're being persecuted like all the time. And you have been. So it's not just a complex, but like in a moment, hopefully when the world starts to realize and open up that, hey, you know what, there's some really important things that have happened in Tigray that we all need to address together. There might still be this heritage of, well, I don't know if I could even trust these people, right? Like it takes a long time to kind of adjust to some of that. So again, really, really important pieces that we need to be looking at. And so how do we start to address some of these things? Well, one of the things about trauma is that the process of mourning gets interrupted, right? And so that's something that we need to kind of figure out and think about. Here's a quote here that I think in its own way is maybe somehow comforting, or at least interesting. The inevitable outcome leaves the person with a profound sense of having lost something supremely good, but having no name for that lost object. Such a person is left without memory, without words. So that's what happens when you don't have a chance to mourn, right? And so one of the things that the Tigray can do moving forward is to take those opportunities to mourn, and take those opportunities to remember and memorialize the people in the community. I love what we did earlier when people were speaking out the names of the people that they were kind of sitting here in memory of, right? Naming people. That was so powerful and so needed. So thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for all the encouragements I can see in the comments too. I'm almost done. I know that the other speaker has to go, so I'm really aware of that. So moving on to, I believe, my last slide. Well, no, this is my second last slide. Let's go to the last slide here though. Ways to address intergenerational trauma for Tigray. So breaking that silence. Like I said, that silence can be, I understand the need for it. I get it. I'm that way with my kids too. You know, there's certain things I don't talk to them about, but we do need this opportunity to mourn. We do need this opportunity to talk about these things. And so a conference or a retreat like this is doing that. And your community is doing a beautiful job with this right now today. So all I'm saying, I'm just cheering for you in the background saying this is beautiful and this is healing. Developing that strong tie to family history, that promotes resilience. Like we said, one of the results of intergenerational trauma is actually patriotism, right? So like, and feeling proud and feeling connected to that heritage, you know? And I've seen people commenting and saying, hey, listen, Tigray, like we've been persecuted for a long, long time. I think someone said centuries, right? And so continue to develop that personal connection to that history. Really learn about it, learn more about it, connect with people more in your community, because that is one of the things that gets lost when a population goes through one of those incredible traumas. Memorializing and recognizing survivors already, that's already happened today to a certain extent, and that's beautiful. Deepening social ties and also supporting parents who went through the genocide to parent their children with strong attachment and flexibility. So thank you. I know I went over my time. I'm sorry. I know the organizer who is messaging me saying, hey, listen, maybe, I recognize that. I apologize. This is the last slide here that I just want to show you. I'm not going to say anything else, but just a picture of a resilient, beautiful young Tigrayan woman. And just remembering that there are actually some positive effects and that there's resilience with this community as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I hope that my message kind of was conveyed somehow. And
it was absolutely powerful, and thank you. And so many comments and reflections, Professor Brent, in the chat. You were really resonating with our guests today. I think in particular, the acknowledgement that it is difficult when we're in mourning, when we're actively amid a genocide, right? We're in active mourning, and then also this experience stirring up, right, the experiences of those who went through this previously. There is a question in the chat. Given our time, though, I'd love if you would respond in chat. It's a question of how can we intervene, especially knowing that mourning the genocide will be a long process, and a number of questions after that. So maybe you could take a moment, but thank you so much. And thank you for uplifting how entangled resilience is, right? That we see that word overused, I think, a lot. So thank you for the spaciousness to see resilience as both a pathway to healing, but also something that takes time to build and to build over generations. And with that, I want to bring Asai up. And again, please, Professor Brent, if you'll respond to some of the questions and comments in chat, that'll be great. Asai is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in trauma and attachment work for kiddos 0 to 5. She's got over 10 years experience working with children who have experienced various forms of trauma. come on up and talk to us about understanding trauma in children and adolescents. And a reminder to our speakers, you've got about 10 minutes or so. We're happy to welcome you up, Asai.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon. Sorry, I'm in California. My name is Asai. I'm very excited to be here with you guys today. A lot of what you will be hearing from me, all of our panelists today have touched on it as well. I just want to get a little bit deeper into specifically for children and adolescents. So I think that just reinforces kind of what we're talking about. No problem, I'm used to it. I'm gonna go through this fast, so I apologize for my speed. Let me just say that now. Okay. Okay, so what is trauma? We've talked about this, right? And a lot of people, I think, especially from communities of color, they perceive trauma as this big event, right? But in reality, trauma is anything that can affect your functioning, anything. And that's really important because a lot of people, when I'm working with their children, I'll ask the parent, what trauma has your child experienced? And the parent will say they haven't experienced any trauma in their lives. And that's very, very rare. It's very, very rare to find somebody who's experienced actually no trauma. And when I give them the definition, well, trauma is anything that affects the functioning in any way of your child. They usually can come up with a lot of more events that might have been traumatic for their child. So how many of us know about ACEs, adverse childhood experience, right? So ACEs are basically anything event that affects your child. And basically almost 2/3 of adults have at least one adverse childhood experience. Majority of people have more than one, right? So if you've experienced homelessness, not having food or water or shelter, war, domestic and international terrorism, even like abuse, not having financial support and ability to provide for yourself, those are all different ACE studies and ACE scores. So basically the ACE studies links between adverse childhood experiences and later on effects that we've heard about, like intergenerational trauma and things like that, that increase your risk based on the amount of trauma that you've experienced in your life. So I thought this was important because I think many people just assume that trauma affects your functioning, but they don't really understand what that might look like, right? So for example, an increase of trauma also affects the amount of cortisol that's going into your brain, and that affects functioning, affects learning, your ability to focus. It can affect your hormones. It can affect the amount of toxins your body holds onto, your nervous system, cellular change, and brave wanes, right? So the effect of trauma or cortisol on a long-term basis is actually more and more negative over time, specifically also for children and adolescents, right? A lot of times, a lot of behaviors or symptoms that we see from people who've experienced trauma include regressive behaviors. So you might have a 7-year-old who goes back to wetting the bed, right? When they've already clearly learned, or even a 4-year-old who goes back to wetting the bed, or wanting to feel more attached or concerned, you know, acting out behavior, anger, increased anxiety, depression. Something that I think is really important to point out is that a lot of people are wrongly diagnosed with ADHD. And the reason you're like, why am I bringing up ADHD and trauma? ADHD and trauma actually look exactly the same, almost symptomatically, right? So a lot of people, you know, will say, oh, your child has ADHD. And that might be sometimes the immediate response. Your child has ADHD. But in reality, it's really important to assess, to have a clinician assess for trauma specifically to rule that out, because a lot of times ADHD is overly diagnosed when it might be traumatic symptoms or responses. So that's just something that I like to plug in there. So I really like this iceberg picture. This iceberg picture really represents sometimes what we see, but what's going on in the underneath it all, right? So a child might appear to be doing okay, but we don't know internally underneath all that, how are they doing? Do they feel safe? Do they feel loved? What are they going through? So we like to make sure that you don't just focus on what you see. Make sure you're digging deeper and understand what's going on and the other aspects that are involved in that. I'm apologizing again. I know I'm talking fast. So what can you do? So where to start? So anytime there is a disruption in normalcy or the rules, the social norms, for example, anytime there's a war or there's a death that seems irregular or even like abuse, usually what happens is that there's a broken safety or rule that has been broken. So one of the first things I tend to do with the children and families I work with is to reestablish those rules, reestablish that safety, reestablish those routines. Those are really important, right? So sometimes it sounds silly to sit down and reestablish family rules and house rules, but that is the first thing I do, because usually when there's been something broken, the first thing you have to do is help people understand how they can be safe and what that looks like. We see this a lot when there's been war or even like domestic violence, sexual abuse. You have to really establish, because the rule has been broken and that child usually does not understand what is it supposed to be like, because a lot of times the abuse they've experienced, the trauma that they've experienced, that is their normal. And if that is their normal, that affects the rules and how they live life, right? How to move forward. So it's really important to reestablish those rules and boundaries. So trust and safety need to be reestablished. I think in our community, it's hard sometimes for parents to listen, but just giving your child space to listen, holding your child is so important. So one of my specialties, as Yodit mentioned, is attachment, really relationship building. And touch is so important for that. Holding, making sure everybody feels held, that they have the space and the protection to be held when there's been trauma. Reassure safety whenever possible, only when it's true. This is highly important. It's really important not to promise safety when a child is still in an unsafe situation, because they won't be able to ever develop safety or trust in that situation. So it's really important to only say that we're working on safety if there's no safety there, but not promise safety if it's not there. Be honest. Give permission to feel emotions. That's something that many of our minority communities, we really struggle with, giving permission to feel emotions. Anger in general is the easiest emotion to usually express, but anger is usually more of a secondary emotion, and usually what's underlying that emotion is something else besides anger. Sadness, disappointment, guilt, fear, scared. So those are really important. How to talk about it, right? Talk about what's really happening, prepare them for reality, don't set them up for failure. So what that basically means is we're not living in a fantasy world. And a lot of these children in Tigray have experienced real things. We have to make sure we're communicating honestly about what's happening in a way where they understand what's happening, they understand the possible incomes. Yes, that needs to be done developmentally appropriate. So you give smaller details and smaller pictures to little kids, and you give more big pictures and bigger details to bigger kids. Use your resources, right? So there's support groups like this organization and all the ones that I've sponsored, sync counseling whenever needed. I think that with this pandemic, there has been a positive and a negative. The negative has been that, or the positive has been that the mental health stigma has really decreased. More and more people are seeking out therapy. So we really see that, especially in our communities, that has really decreased. The negative is that the demand is so high that it's really impossible right now for us to fill the demand. I get calls almost on maybe 3-4 times a week for clients who want to see me in my private practice, and I just don't have the availability with everything going on. So I think that's a good thing that more people need it, but it's still really important. So other coping skills, I know you guys are going to be doing a lot of these in tomorrow's breakouts, and a lot of the other speakers have also talked about these coping skills. And this is not an exhaustive list. Obviously, there's a lot more. And for Free Spirit, I just wanted to say, you made a comment. Yes, and sometimes that's starting off with the basic emotions. A lot of the times where I work with children, I start off with just 4 or 6 basic emotions to start off with, to help them understand happiness, sadness, fear, anxiety. I put silly in there, you know, basic ones that we start off with working with the children and the parents. And then as time goes on and they have a higher vocabulary, we introduce the rest. So other coping skills can be prayer, faith-based skills, physical sports, staying active, talking, music, art, dance, journaling. In general, most people tend to hold trauma in their body. So anything physical is going to be highly recommended. Anything that releases the stress, that cortisol in your body. I want to do an exercise with everybody very quickly. This exercise is really, really helpful, especially for those of you who are caregivers or in the helping field, which I think is like doctors, therapists, everybody, community organizers. We do this a lot for people who've not only experienced trauma themselves, but also vicarious trauma. And so what we do is usually you stand up, but everybody sitting down is fine. If you take your hand, and this is the exercise is called Wipe It Off, right? And you imagine having slime covered all over your body, right? And the slime is like trauma. And you take your hand, and what you're doing is you're putting pressure on your hand. If you can see my hand, I'm putting pressure. It's not like a soft touch pressure, like you're trying to squeegee or wipe the trauma, the slime off your body. And you're shaking it off, right? And you technically do this with your entire body, right? And it seems really silly, but it's an experiential way of kind of getting off some of that gunk, getting off some of that stuff that you're holding on to, right? And this is something that we have actually therapists do a lot to try to release some of that vicarious trauma that you're holding on to. I've had people do this exercise, and when you do it, you take your time. It takes at least about 5 minutes to wipe your whole body and just start breaking down, crying, because you don't realize how much sometimes you're holding in. So sorry, that's called Wipe It Off. Very quick exercise. Okay, these are some books that might be helpful in communicating to children and adolescents about trauma and what's going on. Not all of these books are about the specific trauma that's happening in Tigray, but they're helpful, right? So The Boy Back in the Class is actually a book specifically about a refugee child and his experiences in his new school. Healing Days is about trauma and healing from trauma. Something Happened in Our Town is actually specifically about racial injustice, but I think it has a lot to do with death and dying. A Terrible Thing Happened is a really, it's like a blanket trauma book, meaning that you just communicate about trauma in general. It doesn't name the trauma. So that makes it easier because you can kind of fill in the blanks. The books on the bottom are about attachment, relationship building, how to build those attachments when you've been separated, right? How to make sure to stay linked. And then the last one in the corner, Refugee, that's actually for young adults. And it's a book of 3 different perspectives of different refugees, children and adolescents and their experiences. Again, I apologize for how fast I was talking.
No, you did a really lovely job, and I think it was rich and had depth. Especially, thank you for reminding us of the power of touch. It's one of the things that I really cling to about my experience of being Ethiopian and being in an Ethiopian family, is being fed, being kissed, being hugged and held. So I love that folks have something available to them right away. And I think a gift that you gave us was the 6 emotions, or the 5 emotions that we can help our children to name, and that we can help them to process trauma at the age that they are, which was also hugely helpful, especially for those of us with little ones, that discussion is age appropriate. I didn't see questions in the chat, but a lot of gratitude, an immense amount of gratitude for your offering. There was a request for contact information for you, if you'd like to share that in the chat.
I did put it in there.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for blessing us with that wisdom. And with that, I am going to move us to our second to last presentation offered by, I must say, a dear friend of mine, Dr. Michelle Rodriguez, who is a psychologist and founder of a counseling practice here in Michigan called Collaborative Changemakers. Michelle specializes in trauma and Black mental health and has more than 15 years experience in university counseling centers, community mental health settings, and private practice. And she is going to bring some discussion about gender-based violence, self-care, and collective care. Dr. Michelle.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here. And I'm also probably going to be talking really fast to get through some of this stuff. But before I even do that, and can we go ahead and go advance 2 slides? This talk is going to be about gender-based violence, self-care, and collective care. And as we move through it, in the same way that they did such a great job, I really want to invite us to practice self-care as we're doing this. And a lot of what that means is first slowing down and even listening to our bodies. So you may check in with your body and know that it's maybe a little bit restless from sitting still. You may check in with your body and find that it's heavy from all the things that we've been talking about, but I encourage you to check in. Next slide, please. We're going to be talking about gender-based violence, which is so heavy and so painful, but I want us to notice that we're holding it together. And so even looking at some of the screens, feeling our interconnectedness as we talk about this, the collective trauma, it's important that we hold it together and that none of us has to be alone in holding it and processing it. When you look at this image on the screen, it kind of shows that green area that most of us have this window of tolerance, this range in which we feel like our whole selves and like we're functioning optimally. And when we're experiencing trauma, our body often does things to mobilize to address it. So it may get very amped up, what kind of is talked about as hyperarousal, or it may go kind of numb and lethargic, hypoarousal. But even as we talk about these things, sometimes our body does that same thing. And so we want to notice what's happening even as we're talking about this today. Next slide, please. As you're noticing, I really want to encourage you to just notice the room that you're in. Sometimes when we're talking about trauma, you have the sense of being there and in it. And so noticing what your feet feel like on the ground right now. Noticing where the windows and the doors are in your room. And that most likely where you are right now, you're okay and you're safe. And sometimes our body needs to be reminded of that. Feeling your breath come in and out of your body, maybe taking a sip of water and noticing what that feels like as we drink it. And I love that wipe it off exercise that we use, but sometimes just holding ourselves, sometimes rocking, sometimes gently and slowly tapping and breathing can all be ways that we help to bring ourselves back into that window of tolerance. As we're talking, I want to encourage you to use those practices. We'll talk about some more. Next slide, please. I think that one of the misconceptions that's really been enforced by the mental health field and by psychology is that what happens with trauma happens in our brain. Our neural networks go all throughout our body. There's tons of neurons around our heart, tons of neurons around our stomach. And so even as we're talking, notice what you feel in your chest, in your heart, in your stomach. Often these are where our intuition and our wisdom are speaking to us in ways that our brain hasn't even caught up with yet. And noticing these things and listening to them is often so much a part of our healing. So much of our agency and our wisdom come from our heart and our gut. And so I encourage you to listen to those. I want to first just give a simple definition for gender-based violence. It's been defined as harmful acts directed towards individuals based on their gender. And predominantly, we see this as men perpetrating violence against women, but it's not limited to that. And this is really a global crisis. Women around the world are often not safe in their communities. They're often not feel safe in their own bodies. And so it connects us all, and we really need all hands on deck to deal with it. But I want to be clear, as we're talking, I'm going to shift in a moment to talking about healing, but often survivors feel like they're the problem, and they're really not the problem. The problem of gender-based violence is the systems and the ideologies that condone it, that use it as a tool of power over, and these systems that don't hold people accountable when they are using these strategies, that those are really the problem. Survivors, their lives and their bodies are often part of the enduring evidence of the problem, but we're so much more than just that. We really want to be able to connect with that today. Right now, and so often, part of how gender-based violence looks is rape being used as a tool of war. And we see this happening in today. One of the journalists captured this by saying, there's a level of cruelty that's beyond comprehension. One of the women brave enough to share her stories talked about the person raping her saying, I can do what I want to you and no one cares. And even now, just check in with your body of what that feels like as it moves through your nervous system. That there are people that use their power in that way, that know that they can count on systems not checking them, that they can count on whole communities and power systems turning a blind eye, that that's part of what this looks like. And so it's an act of violence against communities, against relationships, against bodies, against spirits, and against our psychological systems. There's kind of the intersection in this moment of ethnicity and trying to obliterate, destroy the Tigrayan people, but also women's bodies being seen as disposable and a tool to do this. And women often hold shame about rape. And so we're often silenced and afraid to come forward with their stories. They're often threatened when they do come forward with their stories, or isolated. And currently, right now, often people are alienated in rural communities where there's not even places to get help or to tell their stories. That's kind of part of what we're seeing. There's also this part that's just a psychic terrorism, that as the women have come forward and told their stories, they've told stories of public gang rape, they've told stories of being burned internally, having nails and rocks inserted into their body, just horror upon horror upon horror. And so this is what, as we move into this next part, we're talking about addressing in this moment. But this is a pattern of behavior that we see around the world and here in this moment that we're talking about addressing. I believe that, well, let me back up a bit. The harm is immediate and ongoing, and we see it basically in every area of life. There's ongoing physical harm, psychological harm, relational harm, economic harm, like just it affects every area of life. And so when we're trying to help, we have to bring in holistic systems to help all of that. Some of the symptoms that you'll see are in the aftermath of experiencing this violence is fear, sadness, anger, self-blame, shame, guilt, somatic symptoms, as we're talking about earlier, substance abuse, sometimes suicidal or self-harm behaviors, and PTSD symptoms that often look like flashbacks, nightmares, numbness, feeling constantly on guard, easily startled, sleep disruption, and I can just go on and on and on, but this is the legacy that is left in people's bodies. I want to talk about gender-based coping because I think that this is often what is underestimated and what isn't talked about enough. Women, I think, are strategically targeted because we're the birthplace of civilization. We are the kin keepers, the culture keepers, the nurturers. We are often at the core of facilitating healthy processes in community. And so when we are targeted, those get disrupted. In the trauma literature, you'll hear a lot of people talking about fight, flight, sometimes freeze and fawn. But when they studied women's responses to trauma, they also found the tendency to tend to take care of the most vulnerable among us and to befriend. So finding strength and protection in finding solutions together, and also coming together in the aftermath to help self-regulate and to help heal. So it's not just about, do I save myself or do I save others? It's about finding ways to do those together and healing together. I love the actress who played Okoye in Black Panther. She said that the relationships with women are her vibranium. And when we come to this type of healing, we are each other's vibranium. Like someone said earlier, Gade said earlier, we are each other's therapeutic containers. And that's really what we want to pull upon, collective healing. The research also shows there's this part in the back of our brain where all the trauma gets activated, called the ventral vagal system. And basically that's when we are connecting with each other. It helps to bring our systems of healing. It helps to bring our systems of equilibrium back online. And so we need to know that we have this power to help bring ourselves back into status quo by getting into our bodies, but also by connecting with each other. When that gets activated, we start to feel more present and more grounded. We start to feel more connected, calm, clear, compassionate, curious and creative, and we need that to solve these big problems, confident and courageous. So things that we think of as resilience or courage aren't individual characteristics really, as Resma Menakem has talked about. These are energies that move between us, and we really want to optimize our sharing of them to get through these types of things. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about a few areas that trauma impacts and how we want to think about this in our collective care and in our self-care. Trauma often dysregulates and disconnects us from, dysregulates our bodies and disconnects us from our bodies. So that wipe it off, or even there was one time I did an exercise where we're just touching our limbs and reminding ourselves, this is my arm, this is only my arm, restoring that sense of connectedness to our bodies, safety in our bodies, calmness in our bodies is huge. So often therapists rush to the brain, but the front brain is not going to do anything different until the body feels safe and calm. So much of the activation in our nervous system stored in our full body. So we want to listen to our bodies. We want to care for our bodies. It's huge that medical and mental health professionals and all professionals are really listening to what makes people feel safe first, and not engaging with people's bodies just however they see fit in the moment. We also want to be developing strategies because smells and sound are going to reactivate trauma. All of our sensory, it can get reactivated. And so we need strategies to calm that. And that's often where mental health professionals are able to help come in and give tools. But this type of first aid, we can all learn and teach each other. Bodies are often depleted physically, and so we need to refuel and nourish them. Our brains are often overwhelmed in the moment. And so we need as much as possible to slow things down, to keep it simple. I loved the work that Dr. Iota was talking about and how they're slowing things down and creating some safety for children to re-regulate. We also long-term, because often the memory and all of that gets disrupted, want to be able to come together, piece the story back together in ways that empower us, heal us, give us whatever sense of control, honor what we've survived. So the re-owning of our stories and the retelling them in safe places, and just even understanding all of what happened, because there's just so much chaos happening. It's often hard to even make sense of what's happening in the moment. Next slide, please. Trauma often alienates us from our spiritual resources, from each other, from our communities. I mean, just in every way, isolation is such a part of it. And so we want to be able to reconnect with each other in ways that make us feel safe. We want to have people at the forefront naming that this isn't the fault of the survivors. We want to create as much safety for people to decrease stigma and tell their stories as possible. And we also want to, I love how people talked about just these different collective mechanisms of sharing resources, of coming together, that whatever we have, we all have. And we're making sure that everybody is taken care of. And so there's no, hopefully there's as little shame as possible about needing or not being okay as possible. Trauma also robs us of our sense of agency and voice. And so in these moments where it seems dark and dire and so much unknown, we want to focus on what we can do and what we can prepare for. We want to create as much safety as possible. And we want to use our advocacy and lift our voices, because justice is part of the healing too. And so the ways in which we come together to lift our voices, to help each other not have to deal with these things, to create a world where women and girls don't even have to think about these things, is so essential to the long-term. Another piece of trauma is that it changes our sense of self and the world. Often it's, I'm bad, I didn't do enough, I should have done something different. The world is not safe, the world does not care about me. And so we have to have ways of connecting with others and seeing our own goodness mirrored back to us, affirming our goodness, that we did nothing wrong, there was nothing that we didn't see, that we were not the problem. And that the community response, the ways that we hold each other in the aftermath and that we take care of each other, is reaffirming that we are for each other, even if we can't get all of these external forces to be for us in the moment. We want to create as much safety and predictability as possible. And we want to reconnect with our spiritual and cultural resources. In the current context, so many of these things are hard to do, but we can't wait for like the platinum package of when we can do it all. We've got to find little ways to do this everywhere that we can. And I think that's how we create that collective container that we need. And I think that also when you have outside agencies coming in to help, they really need to listen to the agency of the community and of the individuals and follow their lead to get out of the way of healing as much as possible, and to just be there to really support it and to provide resources where needed. The last thing I want to say really quick is to put in context what self-care means, because so often it's talked about as individual. Oh, next slide, please. So often it's talked about as individual. So often it's talked about from a really Eurocentric perspective. Self-care is really this thing that's embedded in that collective care that we were just talking about. Self-care doesn't fix all of the problems at large. It really helps us check in with ourselves and recalibrate so that we can continue just getting through the days, but also continue fighting for the things that matter to us. Self-care is kind of the opposite of self-neglect or self-abandonment. So when the world is treating us like we are less than human and that we don't deserve basic rights, it's reconnecting with ourselves and giving ourselves that, treating ourselves like we matter. A lot of what we're hearing coming out of the healing justice movement is that this has to be part of our resistance work. We have to have rituals where we take care of ourselves, not as an afterthought, but as part of the work that we're doing. Because this work is such a long haul. We've got to listen to our bodies, see what's happening there, and attend to our specific body in our specific moment and figure out what we need to help us get back within that window of tolerance. And also, most importantly, I think, is that there are tons of mental health tools, and I think especially the ones that help us heal in our bodies and connect with community are the most important. But there we had ways of healing before any of these things were happening to us, and we need to reclaim those and center those in our healing processes. What were we doing to feel whole before the atrocities began? Often those are the very things that we need to reconnect with. And so I think that in our doing this, we're asking ourselves, like, what roots me and what guides me through these really horrific things that are happening? How do I take care of my community, and how do I take care of myself as we're moving through them?
Oh, so powerful. As always, I was just typing. I put Resma's book in. Thank you for reminding us of that. And also the Therapy for Black Girls link, which was followed by my cousin Malay put inclusivetherapist.com, just as a reminder for folks that what I'm seeing happen in Gadai is lots of folks are now starting to access support and finding that therapists, especially therapists of color, are busy. And that can, if you work up the courage to do that, and then you get, oh, well, we're not taking appointments, a lot of folks stop there. So I appreciate that folks are adding in. And also you prompted me in that last bullet to remind myself and those of us on the call, something that I've clung to for a long time is we are the descendants of, we are the children of the cradle of civilization. And so how can we reclaim those indigenous healing practices that even though Ethiopia was never formally colonized, you have so much other influence that can cloud those practices or move us away from them. And I'll just tell this funny quick story, Michelle. I think I told you this at the height of the pandemic. My grandmother, by way of essentially this underground railroad, like mailed me holy water that I was instructed to put on my feet, right? To put on my head and on my body. And so thank you. Thanks for taking time with us today. And I think we could hear and listen to all of you for hours. But there was someone who said that your presentation was so grounding, and I think that's an absolute appropriate word. So thank you again, sis, for being here. We love you so much. Yeah. All right. Oh, did you want to say something else? Okay. I'm going to bounce things back to Meron to round us out. Thank you so much, Dr. Rodriguez, and to bring up our final speaker and wrap up the event. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, hello again, everybody.
Let me see if I can help. It looks like Meron might have gotten called away. So I'm going to bring up our next speaker, next and final, and that's Dr. Marsha Derby Davis. And let me just share a little bit. Oh, I'm going to get my screen back. Dr. Derby Davis is a registered nurse for over 30 years in South Florida. She received her PhD from Barry University in 2010 and recently transitioned from the role of a full-time associate professor in the Ron and Kathy Assaf College of Nursing at Southeastern University, I beg your pardon, to becoming an adjunct faculty after 15 years as an educator. Dr. Derby Davis is passionate about helping others obtain healing and balance, and is founder of the Zaharia Healing Body, Mind, and Spirit. Please help me welcome Dr. Marsha Derby Davis. Dr. Davis?
I'm here.
There you are, welcome.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I am so honored to be here today to share in this sacred space, to be among such wonderful group of speakers. So much has been said, and this has been such a heavy space. So before I begin my presentation, I don't see my slides. Okay, right there, perfect. So before I begin my presentation, I'd like for us to just take a few minutes or a few seconds, like our other speakers have said, and just take some deep breath, inhaling through our nose and exhaling through our mouth. Inhaling through our nose and exhaling through our mouths. Can you guys see me? I don't know if I don't see myself. Okay, perfect. And exhaling through our mouth and just grounding ourselves in this space for the next few minutes where we can connect to our mind, body, and spirit. Next slide, please. So where do we begin? And I had to ask myself this, as I am not a member of the Tigrayan community. However, I am a member of the brown and melanated people of the world. And when I received the invitation from Dr. Semhal, I was so honored, and I didn't even know where Tigray was. So I went and I began to just connect. I had to know who the people were and what their struggles were. And as I began to just research and look and connect, my heart was broken as I saw the pain on the women and the children faces. And I just Words could not even fail me. I'm from Jamaica. I have not experienced this type of horrific genocide. One of my favorite quotes is, "The journey of 1,000 miles, excuse me, begin with a single step." Next slide. So the universal question is, why do bad things happen to good people? And I really thought about this question, and I can't answer the question. And although I have not personally experienced the trauma of war, I have not experienced losing loved ones in this lifetime to genocide, I have experienced loss in my life. And as I reflect back on my own life, I decided to be transparent and to share a little of my story with you so that we can connect and see that we all experience the same universal suffering. On the night of December 25th, 2016, my family and I gathered to celebrate the holidays. Although I personally, or my husband and I don't personally celebrate Christmas, the children do. So we gathered for family dinner and we talked and laughed and had the most amazing, amazing time. Later that night, my daughter, Lucy, who was 24 at that time, and her stepsister, Jasmine, went out. As young people do, they went out for the evening to continue the festivities. We woke up the next morning and we didn't see them, and we were wondering, well, what happened? You know, maybe they're at my daughter's house. And so we went to kind of wake them up and give them back their children, and no one answered. Later on the day, we received a knock on the door by the sheriff office and said they had something to tell us. Basically, our daughters had died that night in a terrible automobile accident. The car, there were 4 of them in the car flipped in a lake, and the girls and one of the young men died, and the driver survived. So my life was turned upside down, and I was faced with the decision of, how do I move on? We all have the ability to transmute our emotions and rise above our suffering so that we can live a life of joy and peace. But it's not easy. So how do we do it? So basically today I'm going to share some strategies that I use to help me transcend my pain and suffering to be able to be in this space with you. Next slide, please. The first thing I'd like to say is, it's important for us when we're experiencing any type of trauma is to be able to acknowledge our emotions and then give ourselves permission to heal. There are 2 types of pain in the world: the pain that hurts you and the pain that changes you. And for me, when I experienced the most devastating pain in my life, I can truly say today, 4 years looking back, that pain has changed me. I am not the same woman I was on December 25th, 2016. My whole life has changed. My perspective has changed. And that has propelled me into my work of being a healer. Now, healing doesn't mean the pain never existed. It just means that the damage of that pain no longer controls your life. The damage created by the memories, you're able to move on, and you're not in a state where you are paralyzed by fear. And that's where I was. I was in a state where I was paralyzed by fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't go out. I couldn't get in my car and drive. A professional woman, paralyzed by trauma, paralyzed by the pain. But as I worked through my healing, I began to realize that there is a life after trauma. And I just want to encourage you guys today to know that there is a life after trauma. There is healing. And if you allow yourself to heal, you'll be able to move through this horrific pain that the community is going through today. Next slide, please. So when I lost my daughters, I lost my desire to live. I woke up every single day angry. I was angry because I was still here, and that wasn't fear. That was not fair. Why was it that I was given the gift to be here when my daughter, Lucy, and her sisters was gone? Every day I woke up and I thought my husband was watching me. I didn't realize how depressed I was at the time, but every day I was angry. I did not want to be here. I had to learn to find a purpose in my life, and I had to learn to set the intention for each day. When I first started my healing journey, the only intention I had was to just breathe. And every day I woke up and all I could do was breathe. I spent days and months sitting, looking, and just breathing. And so sometimes as you're going through your journey of healing from trauma, breathing is enough. So each day, set your intention on how you're going to move for that day. And if that intention is just to breathe, that is good enough. Do not go through your life on autopilot. Decide every moment what you want to experience, and decide every day how you want to feel. And again, if it's just breathing, that's good enough. Next slide, please. Slowly, after I learned how to breathe, I began to incorporate affirmations in my life, in my daily routine. I did not believe any of these affirmations because I was so broken, but I said them anyway. The secret is you don't have to believe the affirmations because your subconscious mind cannot tell the difference. All you have to do is just say them, and one day they will become real to you. Just keep practicing. So I began to say these affirmations that had no meaning to me. I am so happy to be alive. And I want you to encourage you to begin to incorporate these affirmations in your life. You can say them out loud with me, or you can say them in your heart. I am so happy to be alive. Good things are happening to me every day. Today, I welcome joy into my life. And this is a big one. I am truly blessed. I am grateful for the many blessings in my life. And everything is working out for my highest good. Everything is working for my highest good. Next slide, please. The next thing I did was I had to learn how to be gentle with myself. I had to release the emotions that no longer serve me. Those emotions that were keeping me trapped, the emotions of anger, fear, disappointment, brokenness, self-sabotaging, every emotion, every negative emotion. Why me? I had to learn to acknowledge. We have to acknowledge our emotions before we can heal from them. We have to say, I am an emotional being, and these are the emotions I'm feeling. And then we have to learn how to release them that no longer serve us. If we want to heal, we have to learn to release fear. We have to learn how to release anger. We have to learn how to release sorrow. We have to learn how to release shame. We have to learn how to release guilt. And we have to allow ourselves to be in a place of peace. Next slide, please. My friends, this is the most difficult part of the journey, forgiveness. we have to practice forgiveness. How is it that my daughters and the other young men died, and yet the driver of the car was alive, and he was walking around like nothing had happened? How could this be? How could this be? I had to learn to forgive myself for not being there to save my daughter from the lake that this car plummeted in. I had to forgive myself. And I had to learn how to forgive the driver of the car. I want you to understand today, forgiveness does not justify or condone one's behavior. Forgiveness does not justify the genocide. Forgiveness does not justify the rape of the women and children. Forgiveness does not justify the rape of the young boys. Forgiveness frees us from our pain and from our suffering. Forgiveness frees us so that we are free to live a life of joy and peace. So I am forgiving you, not because you deserve it. I am forgiving you because I deserve to live a life free of pain and suffering. That is the purpose of forgiveness, my brothers and sisters. It is not for the oppressor. It is not for the ones that's causing genocide to the people of Tigray, but it's for us so that we can have a life of peace, so that we can be able to move forward. Next slide, please. And part of this healing journey is learning to hold space for others through compassion and loving kindness. Learning to practice loving kindness to yourself, self-care, we heard about that, and loving kindness for others. When you practice loving kindness to yourself, you're telling yourself, may I be filled with loving kindness. May I be held in loving kindness. May I feel calm and connected. May I accept myself just as I am. And may I know the natural joy of being alive. Next slide, please. And we must practice loving kindness to others. And when we send them loving kindness, we're saying to them, may you be filled with loving kindness. And so I am sending loving kindness to my brown and melanated sisters and brothers of Tigray. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be held in loving kindness. May you feel calm and connected. May you accept yourself just as you are. And may you, my brothers and sisters, know the natural joy of being alive. Next slide, please. Finally, allow yourself to be present. I told my therapist when the girls died, I would never allow myself to be happy again. I wanted to spend the rest of my life hiding in my house and looking outside the window. As I progressed through my healing, I learned to be present. And I want to encourage each of you today to show up for your life. No matter how bad it hurts, just show up. Show up and breathe. Show up and be present. Show up for your community. Show up for your ancestors. Show up for those who have gone on before. Be present every day. Cultivate an attitude of gratitude. And so today, I am so happy and grateful to be alive today. I am so happy and grateful to be here because the gift that I received from my daughter was the gift that she chose to leave so that I could be present with you today. And for that, I am so grateful. The gift that she chose to leave so that I could move into my divine purpose of bringing healing and love and joy to those who are suffering. So I am so happy and grateful to be present. And I want to encourage each of you, choose to be present. Next slide, please. So today, with utmost gratitude, my brothers and my sisters, I honor the place in which the entire universe dwells. I honor the place in you, which is of love and truth and light and peace. When you are in that place and I am in that place, we are one. Next slide, please. Much blessings, much honor. May your days be filled with loving light. I love you. I honor you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Derby Davis. That was amazing. It was very powerful, so touching. Thank you for sharing your personal, intimate testimony with us, and just really just your healing journey. Thank you for reminding us to show up for ourselves, to show up for our ancestors, to show up for our family and loved ones in Tigray and in Sudan. I think this was a perfect way to end this event today. We are going to also talk about, if we can go to the next slide. Prior to that, I didn't know if there were any questions in the chat before we move on. And if there are, maybe Dr. Derby Davis, Mele will personally message you the questions and you can answer them in the chat.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Again, I just want to thank every single speaker today. You've touched my heart. I'm sure you've touched the hearts of the audience members today. You've really provided us with some really great foundational, like educational learning tools, some actual like active activities that we can do. And we really just wanted to create a space, a safe space, and a place that we could all kind of release. And I hope that that was what that was for you all today. I want to thank everybody in the background. This was a huge effort. Like we said, we met with 15 different Tagaru support groups to help put this together, to ask what are the needs of our community. And this is just the first event. We hope to throw more. And one thing I wanted to ask for all, I wanted to thank every single audience member as well. We're so grateful for you sharing this space with us. We're honored to have you and just grateful to be able to throw an event like this. One thing I wanted to ask everybody, if you could just drop one word in the chat describing what you are feeling now. I think for me, it's gratitude, deep, deep gratitude. And as I'll kind of talk through the sponsors, I'll talk about some of the auction items. And as you guys are dropping some of the thoughts you're having in your minds and hearts and bodies, I'll go ahead and share my screen so I can show you how the auction website works. A lot of the, not a lot, but all of what we raised today will go to HPN4Tigray's initiatives. Those are health initiatives. We've already allocated $10,000 to the project that Dr. Iota talked about earlier. We're going to continue to support that initiative under HPN. We're so excited that we've had all these amazing speakers. We want to make these resources available to all of you in both English and Tigrinya, with hopes of posting a lot of these resources on our website. So I'll quickly share my screen so that I can show you how the auction website works, and then I'll talk about the support groups. We'll show the support groups, and we'll be wrapping up today. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see my screen. So it's the website that we can drop in the chat again. So it's called Event Groove. We've already raised 1,160 just off of this call. And as you can see, we have 28 days and 23 hours. So you'll have a lot of time that we're gonna be promoting this fundraiser. If you go to here experience, it tells you what HPN is all about. And then you can go directly to bid auction items, or you can go to auction items up here, and you can actually look at every single auction item that we will be auctioning off for your bidding. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to bid on this specific art piece. Here is a description of the art piece, who the artist is. We've included the handles of the artist so that you guys can follow them on Instagram. You place the bid, and then you see that right now it's at 50, and you have to bid $10 above whatever the current bid is. And that's how it works. So let's say I say $60, add it to my cart, and I can continue bidding on other artworks. Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. If anybody has questions, feel free to email us. I'm gonna drop that in the chat again, so everybody has it. And then if we can, Sara, go to the support group slide that you had up, and I'll quickly explain the support groups. And as we're pulling that up, I want to talk about, you'll be able to see all of our sponsors on the slide. So we've had amazing sponsors. This is our first initiative of asking for financial sponsorship for events. We plan to continue to do this moving forward. We are now officially a 501c3, yay! So people can get tax write-offs for donations. So Saraya Coffee was a huge sponsor and donor. She's also going to be donating a set of coffee, a coffee set for us, as well as provided a very large donation for our campaign. Araya, or I said Araya, that's Array, is a telepsychiatry service that one of our psychiatrists, part of HPN, works for, Dr. Samhal. They donated to as sponsors as well. Be Well Women Health is a comprehensive gynecological practice, also a sponsor of HPN for this event. Finding Destiny is an amazing group. They're a nonprofit. They're focused on supporting girls' education and community engagement. And then our moderator, I should have thanked her as well. Yodi was such an amazing moderator. We're so grateful to have you as just kind of facilitate and navigate us through the day today. But she not only sponsored the event, moderated the event, and also provided a donation for the auction, which is our Black Book Box, which is amazing. It's a subscription that you can get. Her website we dropped in the chat, but it comes with Black authors, journaling, and like a surprise gift set. But if you go on the bidding auction website, you can see more details. Gonjo also donated. They're donating merchandise and clothing. They have specific clothing and merchandise on their website that says that it will go to HPN. Teshalima is a jewelry company. They have donated some awesome pieces and sets of jewelry for us. My Mescal had a birthday giveaway where she was fundraising for HPN as well with her jewelry on her website. Mills Tigrinya classes, she's also part of HPN and the communication team. She's donating a Tigrinya class, and that will be from ages 8 to 18 years old, a virtual Tigrinya class, which I myself need to enroll in. Bilen, our amazing poet, she's also Tigrawati. She's also a therapist. She will be speaking tomorrow and presenting her amazing poetry for us. She donated 2 books that are signed, and Blush by Mackie. They are located in the DMV area, and she's offering a full makeup and lash session. Tyndall is a life coaching. I've actually worked with Angela myself. She's amazing. You will get 3 sessions with her. She will fix your life. No, but she's amazing. And that is actually worth $450. I think we started the auction at $200. And then I just want to thank our amazing collective group of artists, both Tagaru and allies, for advocating through their art, donating free of charge these amazing pieces. And everybody that donated, these were all free of charge to HPN. So all of the funds will go towards Tigray and Sudan. If you go on our HPN4Tigray Instagram, you can see on some of our most recent posts exactly what our organization's been doing on the ground. So thank you to all the artists that have participated. We have a total of 20 art pieces and 12 merchandise, 11 artists that participated. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So we'll go into the support groups. We'll play some music to end out on. So if Sara, you can click to the next slide, I'll quickly explain what these support groups are. So these are support groups on all platforms. So they're on Zoom, they're on Clubhouse, social media, Cyber Power of Tigray. And you can kind of slowly read through it. We'll give you about 30 seconds per slide so that you can read through it. These will be both the art auction and the support groups will be something we repeat again for tomorrow's event. We hope that you can join us. Tomorrow is going to be super interactive, super fun and exciting. More of a breakout session system where you get to do yoga, you'll get to do Bollywood dance, journaling, reflective, fitness, comedy hour. So different like cool ways to kind of give you actual activities to do. So I'll go ahead and play the song, and we thank you so much. Okay, we can just wrap up here. We just want to thank you all for your energy, your time, your participation, and your vulnerability. And thank you so much for honoring us with your presence today. We hope to see you guys tomorrow, same time, different Zoom account. So make sure that you look at the different Zoom ID for the meeting tomorrow. All right, have a great rest of your day to everybody and enjoy your holiday weekend.